So I think one thing we should probably speak about is how to get through your first year as a doctor. And I think that's like such a big thing that so many people get so nervous about. I know I did when I first knew that I was gonna become a doctor for the first time. I think, well, yeah, it doesn't really hit you until that last year of medical school where you're sort of, shadowing interns and you're trying to figure out, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna talk to this patient? How would I deliver bad news? How would I do this procedure all on my own? I mean, you start to put yourself in the perspective of an actual doctor, and then that's when the realization and real sense of imposter syndrome sorts of starts to creep on in. So yeah, let's go through how I dealt with it, and maybe you'll learn about some tips of how to get through it for yourself as well. So yeah, let's get stuck into it, and we'll talk through some of the things that I did that made me feel a little bit more comfortable, but ultimately in the end it's just about ripping off the band-aid and yeah, going through it as best you can. So made ourselves a nice little lemon and ginger tea, which is honestly perfect on a day like today. So nice and like refreshing. The long and the short of it is that the transition from anything is going to be tough, whether it's from resident to registrar, registrar to consultant, medical student to intern. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Anytime you transition from one state that you're comfortable in to a different state where you're not too comfortable in and it's a completely new opportunity, of course it's going to be like tricky and challenging. I remember like each year in high school, it was the same sort of feeling that as soon as you got really comfortable in year 5, the jump to year 6 was absolutely massive. And then the jump to year 7 after that was massive. And then, you just have to go in that situation and you get comfortable, and then you start to improve and level up. And then eventually after that, you're ready to take the next step. And that's sort of the way it works. So if you have that mindset that, I just have to experience it, I'll use all my skills that I've learned currently and see how I go with, leveling up. And then, there might be some things that maybe I wasn't that good at and I needed to improve on. And then you use it as an opportunity to learn rather than see it as like a big challenge or a big adversity. Do you know what I mean? So I think one part of this whole transition from medical student to intern is just the whole transition mindset and being able to feel okay with being uncomfortable. And if you can do that, then I think you're halfway there, because that's all it is really. I mean, you're not going to master the feeling about, transitioning from a medical student to like a real life doctor until you actually start being a real life doctor. So, for the first day it's going to be terrible, and for the next day it's going to be slightly less terrible. And then the day after that, it might be the worst one ever. But then the 4th day you come back and you actually feel like you're on top of your stuff, and maybe you make some good diagnoses, maybe you don't miss a cannula, maybe you make a good referral. But then you rock up the next week and you make some of the worst referrals ever, and you feel like you have no idea about how medicine works. So this roller coaster is definitely going to be expected in that first week, the first 2 weeks, probably the first few months of being a doctor. And I still feel like that now sometimes when you get something wrong or you make a mistake and you think, wow, what am I doing? Like all this stuff that I've been studying and all this time that I've spent doing this thing, it can start to feel like it unravels. And I mean, the way to transition, the way to get out of that mindset of, I'm such a big imposter, is that you just look at those things like little speed humps along the way, or learning opportunities and points of clarification. And you can avoid them a little bit, I think, if you question more things along the way. So each time you, like I I sort of feel like a lot of people in medicine are like those robot vacuums that just like keep going in one direction until they hit a wall, and then they spin and then they do a different direction when they're told to like do something else. I think they're called Roombas or something. And we had like we had like a similar sort of one ages ago, and you watch it and you're like, I am honestly like this this vacuum that, you know, heads in this direction, and then, you know, you'll keep doing something, and then a consultant will like pull you up and you'll be like, oh no, I should definitely not do that, or maybe I should do something differently, and then they just point you in a different direction. And you sort of learn through all these different people and interactions and different patients that you experience and different procedures. You might encounter this like really tricky procedure that up until this point has been like super straightforward and super easy, but this procedure on this particular patient is just like, you know, really testing you. And when you overcome that, you'll know for next time, or you'll have this thought about the possibility of that happening for a potential patient in the future. So, I mean, yeah, of course, there's like always learning opportunities. There's always going to be like little speed humps along the way. But if you change your mindset, I think you're halfway there. Yeah, realistically what you can do, and what I actually tried to do during my last year of medical school, is you sort of start to do like more clinical rotations towards the end. And the more time I got on the wards and, you know, in clinical practice, I tried to see what the interns were doing, the first year doctors. I mean, sometimes it's like seen as like boring and you want to not do notes and you don't want to do like admin jobs, but I think that's half the problem with making your life as easy as it can be, is understanding what the flow of the hospital is like, how things actually work. And you really learn that through being an intern, because stuff needs to happen, or jobs need to happen that you aren't even aware of. And one step that you think is just one jump from this place to this place could have about 10 or 20 steps in between that involves all these different people. So being an intern exposes you to all those different steps, because you're often the person who has to make sure those things happen. And your job might be, you need to get this person out of hospital, or they need to be discharged today. But they need like 10 different things to make sure they're suitable to go home. They need to be cleared by all the allied health. They need to have a discharge medication script. They need to have a discharge summary. They need to have their follow-up booked. They need to have their next of kin updated. Maybe they need to have some medical certificates sorted. Maybe they need to have some tubes taken out. So if, you know, someone can't take out a drain tube, then you need to go and take out the drain tube. If the GP needs a letter to be sent to them, then you have to do that as well. So, you know, one simple step that a medical student sees, an intern sees 10 different steps instead. So that's just one example where that could be the case. And I think learning more of those steps, or asking interns in your final year as a medical student what the steps are to do that, then it sort of eases your mind a bit and doesn't like overwhelm you. First day in the job, you're like, oh, well, I'll just do this. And then you're like, oh no, freaking out. Like, I've got to do A, B, and C and I can't manage it. And yeah, it can be a bit tricky like that. After you transition, you have the first few months under your belt. It's almost like you're trying to survive the rest of the year and how to best do that. And looking back at it, I mean, the first little bit is survival mode. You're just trying to not make mistakes, not get things wrong, make sure everything flows as well as it can, which it won't, by the way. And there'll be some speed humps that you will need help overcoming. Maybe it's another intern who you need to help out, or they need to help out you, or maybe there's some issues within the team. There's always like difficulties in any work environment, and internship and the hospital system is, you know, not dissimilar to other workplaces. So, I mean, looking after yourself is definitely going to be top priority in internship. It's a massive, you know, massive change. And I think some of the few things that I tried to make sure that I didn't have to worry about was stuff like, just choosing the right place to do internship in. And one of the decisions that I made was that I wanted to intern at the same place that I was a medical student at. So essentially we get assigned clinical schools or places where we do placement in, or essentially they're like hospitals that you do clinical placement at or rotations during your medical school journey. And if you get placed at a hospital, usually you get familiar with the environment, the people who work there, the staff, and maybe some of the doctors as well. So, if you start to intern at that same place that you are familiar with, then you don't need to worry about a whole bunch of other things. You don't need to worry about where's parking, where the bathrooms are, how the hospital works, how the layout is. You're already exposed to the same system that they use. Maybe this hospital uses Cerner, the next hospital would use like Epic, and maybe the other hospital is all paper-based. And, you're not exposed to any of those things if you go to a completely different system and you have to work all that out in the first few weeks. Yeah, that's just something that I wanted to do, and that's why I decided to intern at the same place. I didn't want to have to work out all those basic things that lots of people would have to do on their first day at work, on their first few weeks at work. And I wanted to just focus on the medicine and getting really good at that sort of stuff and becoming the best intern that I could be. And yeah, I think it's pretty tricky when you go to a new place and you're surrounded by different things that, you're not familiar with how the layout is and just basic things. So yeah, and it's the people as well. I mean, you just are familiar with the staff, the nursing staff, the allied health staff, and the doctors as well. I mean, that familiarity is such a big win if you're looking to just ease the pressure of entering your first year as a doctor. As long as you get that first year under your belt, I think it gives you a whole lot of confidence. Because just comparing, the first year as a doctor to how I was going into this year. So my first year, I was at the same workplace. I didn't, need to learn everything new. I didn't need to learn a new route to work and where to park and how to best, do all these different things around the hospital. But this year, going into a new role, I stepped up from resident to registrar in a new hospital, and you have to figure out both things at the same time. And comparing that to just doing one thing at a time and having the location and everything down pat in the system, whereas now I was going into a new system, a new role, a new place, and new people, completely changes the ballpark. So it's very interesting and tricky, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Yeah, maybe one thing to consider if you really wanted to try to help yourself out is consider doing internship at the same place that you were a student at. Some of the other things that really ease the pressure is making sure you check in with people along the way, whether it be another intern who is on the same team with you, or maybe they're on a different team at the same hospital or health network. Maybe they're at a different hospital, and just having that person to bounce ideas off. And if, maybe you're working too much overtime and you're not getting compensated for it. Maybe you have an issue, or you're not getting on with some of the people that you're working with, or maybe you've had a really bad patient experience or interaction. Just being able to emotionally offload that stuff is super important, and otherwise you just sort of build up and you take on all this stuff. And yeah, it's not unique to medicine, but a lot of people have experienced that in medicine. I think all people who get into medicine are well aware of the pressure or the weight that people put on their shoulders, and they often take on a whole lot of things, and sometimes it doesn't work out the best for them. So having that person or people or, voice that you can actually emotionally offload all this stuff to is, one of the biggest things. And I think I've had that experience a few times during my career as a doctor, and those people you really, weigh heavily on, and you really rely on them to be able to support you in that time. And having that support there is honestly, it's a game changer. and you don't think you need it until you do. And if you want something like that and you haven't set it up properly already, then it's kind of hard to force something like that. So having people who you know like and support and who can talk to and you can listen to, and then they can listen to you, is super important. So keep those people close, and then if they need you, then you can be there for them, but vice versa as well, for them being there for you. Support networks is a massive one for your first year as a doctor. Also, more broadly, just while you're a doctor at any stage, you know, having a support network is, yeah, really, really good and super, super important. Yeah, some of the other things that you can do to just survive internship is to get some people in your corner to try to dictate like your next year or your next steps of figuring out this whole doctor thing. And it can be a little bit overwhelming, and some people just want to survive and get through the day and get through the whole first year and not worry about the whole specialization thing. But I think from my experience and talking to a lot of people, figuring out stuff early on is almost better, and I feel like that is one of the best things that you can do in your first year as well. And indirectly that helps you because it channels your focus and your interests and everything like that. And it's actually interesting, but very early in your year you have to sort out where you're going to do your job next year as a resident, and what you're going to do, and what stream you're going to go into, and what you want to do for rotations. And you actually need references for the application process, and if you want to move hospitals, then you need to apply, and you need to think about different locations and where to live. And all this stuff sort of happens in the middle of the year, in like, you know, late May, early June, which means you have to set everything up in like April and even like before that as well. So having a good preparation about how the year is going to flow is sort of going to help you in the long run, and in a way that is a survival tactic because it's preparation. So if you have the mindset that when you first start internship, yes, get yourself together for the first few months or the first few weeks, and then you can start to really consider what you sort of want to do and who the people are that are going to be able to support you and help guide you make that decision. So if you're really leaning towards a surgery mindset, maybe it's putting surgery rotations at the start of the year to really figure out if you're into it or not. And if you're not into it, then that's completely fine, but you've figured that out early rather than later on in the year. And I guess in internship for me, like, it was kind of interesting because I didn't really do that at all, and I didn't even get the rotation that I sort of wanted to do in internship, which was anesthetics, and there was only like 5 rotations for the whole year. And I think I started off with emergency, and then I did psychiatry, then I did general medicine, I did emergency as well, but in a rural placement, and then I finished off with urology. And during the middle of the year, like when job applications are going out, I mean, I had some good references from psychiatry and emergency term, and they were good people and they backed me in and they got on with me and I got on with them. But it's not like I really wanted to go down either of those paths, and I certainly wasn't going to do psychiatry. And I wasn't thinking about ED as a potential career option either. So I wasn't really sure what to do, but I ended up picking a surgical stream, I think just because I was still interested in anesthetics at that time, but I thought that, you know, could I do general or could I do surgical? And I was sort of leaning towards surgical because I thought, well, if I did anesthetics, then I would rather a more surgical exposure than medical, which probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense thinking back on it, but I picked the surgical stream. And we can go through that in a different video, probably in like a non-podcast sort of topic where I can actually show you some stuff on the screen and show you the different streams of residency. But yeah, essentially what it is when you become a resident, which is, anywhere from a PGY2, second year doctor, up of that before, becoming a registrar. You essentially have different streams that you can do. You can have like general stream, you can have a surgical stream, a medical stream, and you have some other different, types of residents as well. But the general medical and surgical streams just, characterize the types of rotations that are on offer to you. So surgical stream will obviously have more surgical rotations, but you can still do a few rotations that are common to all streams. Like for all streams, you can do emergency department as a rotation. For general, you have a mixture of surgical and medical, and for medical, you have, more medical options. Like you can do like endocrine and cardiology and respiratory, whereas that's probably not available to someone who's doing a surgical resident year. So those are just different things to sort of keep in mind, but it's not a be all and end all. So yeah, I think early on in your internship and even before internship, where you're sort of picking your rotations or your combinations of rotations, think about how it's going to set you up. And you want to do stuff that you're pretty keen on at the start of the year, so you can ideally get references from those rotations to apply for a job for the next year. And that sort of leads on to, things in the next few years. And each year after that as a doctor, you sort of want to try to preference your favored rotations towards the start of the year, so you can get your references, get your applications in, and ideally set up the following year. Because the second half of the year, it's not like it's like dead space or something, but you can still get really good references and you can still get really good experience and learn a whole lot, but your following year is already decided by July, August. So if you haven't set it up properly early in the year, you're sort of just on your back foot a little bit, and maybe you can feel like you're getting behind. It's not a big deal, but it's just something to consider. And it certainly threw me off guard when I was, I had already like got all my rotations and wasn't really sure about what to do. And then all this like interview stuff comes around and job applications, and you're just like, I don't even want to think about this. I just want to get through the year and focus on, getting through my weekend cover shift. So having the ability to forward plan and to actually look at the whole bigger picture is always a good thing. And sometimes when you're so like, you got the blinkers on, you're like microscopically focused on just getting through daily tasks, it's good to take a step back and look at the big picture and general direction that you're headed in. So sometimes you just need to talk or listen to someone or, read something and have that different perspective, because you can't be expected to work it out all by yourself. And maybe it's just bouncing ideas off a senior registrar or, a resident who's a couple years ahead of you. I mean, just ask what they did and what they would change, and often you can work out the best decision for you. But there's always people to talk to, and there's always like different ways of getting in touch with people in similar positions or who have similar interests to you. And if they're on a certain path, ideally, if they've started on a certain path, arguably they would have really good checkpoints to cover before you have to get to the next step. And maybe it's trying to get an anesthetics rotation in the first 2 rotations for the year. Maybe it's trying to get involved in research for a certain specialty, or whatever it is. I mean, just work out what you need to do and try to do that. And the sooner you do it, the easier it is. So in some ways you may think that's probably not a survival tactic, but I would argue that it is, because if you don't forward think, if you don't look at the bigger picture as well as the smaller picture, then you can sort of start to focus on the wrong things, and it actually ends up biting you in the butt later on, because you haven't had to think about the big picture, and you're constantly focused on little things, which you need a balance, of course. You need to do both. I'm trying to think of like what other survival tactics that I have or ways that I got through internship But I mean, apart from having really good support networks, looking at each day as a new learning opportunity rather than like getting scared of making mistakes and, you know, not knowing the answer to everything, but just being safe and essentially trying to get the most out of every opportunity is the best way you can go about internship. And yes, it's going to be terrible and, you know, scary and sort of daunting, and it really is up until that first few weeks where you're just in when you're just in the swing of it and you're actually just doing the job and start to actually get a flow-on effect of I don't know, just getting used to what it's like to be a doctor. Until that happens, then you're constantly feeling like you're swimming in the deep end and not really being able to keep afloat. So yeah, and I guess taking it, oh, actually no, the one other thing I would say is that taking a break and taking breaks before you get burnt out is probably the best thing as well. So you may have the first few months where you're just running on pure adrenaline, and that is just not sustainable. So having the ability to pull back and take a day off for sick leave, take a day off for personal leave or a mental health day, or if you need to go to a family event, make sure you get a swap in. So you're not going from an all-day Saturday cover shift into an all-day family event into a 6-day week the following week. You're just going to smash yourself, and there's no point in doing that. So putting in the hard yards, yes, to get the most out of the job and not taking the easy way out, of course, but I think having the ability to forward plan and to actually say, well, I know I need this long weekend. I'm not going to pick up an extra shift or do anything like that. I'm going to actually take a 3-day break, no study, no conferences, no like extracurricular stuff, and just take a break to really focus on myself and go for a run or do some exercise or just watch 8 hours of TV shows, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But not doing work is probably a good thing in the big picture of just, you know, longevity and sustainability. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that when you're surrounded by a whole lot of people who are very high achieving. We're in a system that really offers you 24/7 access to stuff to do and problems to solve and time to devote. It's, you know, it can be all consuming. So having the ability to step back from that and really focus on other things that are more important to you is certainly like a massive consideration. And if you don't do that, then it can actually, you know, it can actually impact you negatively in the long run, whether that be in the next 6 months or the second half of the year or in the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, and not having the ability to compartmentalize your time is certainly a con, and you get better at it over time, and you can't be expected to perfectly allocate your time to work and family and study and friends and all these different things when you first start out. And I mean, I think, yeah, what did I do? I decided that it was a good idea to move house in the first few weeks of internship, and that was certainly chaotic. I was unpacking boxes when I was home and then trying to figure out how to get to work in the morning, and then, you know, coming back home and sorting out different pieces of furniture and, you know, Facebook Marketplace and doing all these different things, and it's like chaos. But I don't know, it was good fun. I made it work, and yeah, it's not the worst thing that can happen to you. So yeah, I don't know if there's a perfect answer to transitioning from your final year as a med student to being a doctor, but, you know, consuming as much information is good. Shadowing interns is good, and getting used to the actual day-to-day tasks are some of the ways that you can sort of ease your anxiety and everything like that. But understand that there's no perfect way other than to just go in, get it done, and rip off the band-aid, and I mean, just experience what it's like. You might have a code blue for the first interaction as a doctor and have no idea what to do. And, you know, maybe it's just having some notes saved on your phone about how to, you know, what's the best tips for an intern in a Code Blue. Or, you know, maybe you're asked to chart a medication and you have never even heard of this medication before, but not getting frustrated that you don't know that medication or the dose to chart or the route to chart of the medication, but knowing the place to look up where to find that information, and knowing that Australian Medical Handbook is an awesome resource that if you just have the app on your phone, you're able to just figure out that problem in 2 minutes rather than stress about it for half an hour. So having the resources and utilities, and knowing where to go to solve certain problems is one of the best things you can do, because then you just become like a person in a library and you just need to have access to the library of stuff. You don't need to remember every single page of every single book and have that information just stored in your head. But having resources and knowing where to find those resources is half the battle. And I think that's what you do as you get further on in your career, is you just sort of know where to find stuff and know where to go to stuff, and eventually you accumulate knowledge through just exposure and just repetition. But early on, you know, it's like when you do like a maths question, I guess. You have the formula, you have the way to do it, the method, and you apply that method to the question that's being asked of you. And then eventually you don't have the method or the formula next to you, and you can just look at the question and do it and figure it out, because the formula is already in your head. It's already stored, it's remembered, the pathway is already like embedded and imprinted on you. So you don't need to refer to anything, but you can't do that automatically. And it does take maybe 5, 10, 20 attempts before you can be able to do something. Like before, I could have, you know, just charted a medication off the top of my head, without looking at like a medication handbook is, you know, a really big example about how you can do those sorts of things. Or to look at a chest x-ray and know exactly, you know, how to interpret it. Or maybe it's just like a patient tells you the medication they're taking by the brand name rather than the generic name that you've been taught in medical school. And as soon as you just hear that trade name, then you're like, oh, that's that medication. And that just comes over time. So having little cheat sheets or handbooks or resources or apps or notes on your phone is certainly a good way to overcome that difficulty. And then eventually over time, you don't need those resources. And you just get better and better over time. So I think that's the thing, is that the common thread with everything that I'm saying is that have the mindset change so that it's an opportunity and a growth mindset rather than a negative fear factor sort of thing. And then doing as much as you can to prepare is good, but not getting stressed out and not freaking out that you're expected to know everything. It's good if you do know certain things, but if you don't, just know where to go to them or know who to find out that information from, whether it be another colleague or a senior colleague or some sort of person who you can just rely on. It doesn't need to be another doctor, but having someone who you can just talk to and ask for advice is half the battle. So if you are listening to this and you are a final year medical student or early on in your medical student career, or maybe you're an intern about halfway through the year, maybe you can like have a listen to this, and if you're not implementing a few of these things, then you can start to implement them, and hopefully that helps just getting through the year. So we'll see you next time, and I'll enjoy the rest of this tea. It's probably gone cold by now, so almost cold. Yeah, almost cold. All right, bye.